An Amalekite arrived with news of the battle on Mount Gilboa, falsely claiming he killed a wounded Saul at the king's request. Expecting a reward, he brought Saul's crown and bracelet to David. Instead, David was heartbroken, mourning for his king and his friend Jonathan. He then had the man executed for lifting his hand against the Lord's anointed and composed a beautiful lament. Following the Lord's guidance, David was anointed king over Judah. However, Saul's commander, Abner, anointed Saul's son, Ishbosheth, as king over the rest of Israel, igniting a bitter civil war. After a long and bloody conflict, Abner defected and offered to unite the nation under David. But Joab, David's commander, seeking revenge for a brother Abner had killed, treacherously murdered Abner. David was devastated, publicly condemning Joab's ruthless act and mourning his rival. Two of Ishbosheth's captains, seeking a reward, murdered him and brought his head to David. But David, enraged by their treachery against a righteous man, had them executed, sending a clear message about his kingship. Soon after, the elders of all Israel came and anointed him king. David then captured the stronghold of Jerusalem, establishing it as his capital. When the Philistines attacked, David, after consulting God, defeated them decisively. Next, David resolved to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. As they transported it, a man named Uzzah was killed for touching it to steady it, causing David to fear the Lord's holiness. After a period of waiting, David led a joyous procession, dancing before the Lord with all his might as the ark entered the city. His devotion was so uninhibited that his wife, Michal, despised him for it. After settling into his new palace, David felt compelled to build a grand temple for God, but through the prophet Nathan, the Lord declared he would build a dynasty for David instead, promising to establish his throne forever. Following this divine covenant, David's power grew as he conquered many surrounding nations, establishing peace in a vast kingdom. With his reign secured, David remembered his covenant with Jonathan and asked if any of Saul's house remained. He was told of Mephibosheth, Jonathan's son, who was lame. David, showing great kindness, restored all of Saul's land to him, and brought him to live in the palace. He invited Mephibosheth to eat at the king's table for the rest of his life. A profound act of grace and enduring loyalty that fulfilled his promise to his dear friend. In a gesture of kindness, David sent messengers to the new king of the Ammonites, Hanan, but they were publicly humiliated and sent away. This act sparked a war, and David's army, led by Joab, decisively defeated the Ammonites and their allies, extending his kingdom's influence. While his army was away, David remained in Jerusalem. From his rooftop, he saw a beautiful woman, Bathsheba, bathing and took her, leading to an illicit affair. When she became pregnant, David desperately tried to cover his sin by calling her husband, Uriah the Hittite, home from battle. But Uriah, a man of integrity, refused to indulge while his comrades were at war. In his final act of deceit, David arranged for Uriah to be killed in battle. Later, the prophet Nathan confronted David with a powerful parable, leading David to confess his sin. Nathan revealed God's judgment. The child born to Bathsheba would die. David repented, but the child fell sick and died, a devastating consequence of his actions. After David's son Amnon raped his half-sister, Tamar, her brother Absalom patiently nursed his vengeance. 2 years later, he had his servants murder Amnon at a feast and then fled to exile. After 3 years, Absalom returned to Jerusalem, but David, in his grief, refused to see him for 2 more years, a painful estrangement. Filled with ambition and resentment, Absalom began to win the hearts of the people, publicly greeting them and promising justice. Under the pretense of fulfilling a vow, he went to Hebron and declared himself king, launching a full-scale rebellion. The conspiracy swelled, and David, faced with this devastating betrayal, was forced to flee Jerusalem with his loyal followers, leaving the city to his own rebellious son. As David fled Jerusalem from Absalom's rebellion, he encountered a string of betrayals and insults. Ziba slandered Mephibosheth, and Shimei cursed the king, yet David bore it with humility. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, Absalom publicly disgraced his father and sought to kill him swiftly, but David's loyal spy Hushai outwitted the counsel of Ahithophel, delaying the attack. Ahithophel, his advice rejected, took his own life. When the armies finally met, David commanded his men to deal gently with Absalom, but in the midst of the battle Absalom's long hair became entangled in the branches of a tree, leaving him helpless. Joab, seeing his opportunity, ruthlessly killed him. When the news reached David, he was overcome with devastating grief, weeping, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son." Despite his victory, David was consumed by grief for Absalom, frustrating his loyal army. Joab rebuked him, urging him to acknowledge their triumph. As David returned to Jerusalem, he faced both loyalty and lingering resentment. Shimei, who had cursed him, begged for forgiveness, and was spared. David showed kindness to Mephibosheth, despite Ziba's lies. The men of Israel argued over who had the greater honor in bringing the king back. A new rebellion arose, led by Sheba, causing further unrest until Joab pursued and killed him. Later a famine struck Israel for 3 years, attributed to Saul's sin against the Gibeonites. To atone, David delivered 7 of Saul's descendants to the Gibeonites who put them to death. Finally, the narrative recounts several battles against the Philistines, highlighting the bravery of David's men. As David's tumultuous reign drew to a close, he composed a profound song of thanksgiving, praising God as his rock and deliverer from every enemy. He then delivered his last words, reflecting on his legacy and the valor of his mighty men, a testament to a life of war and faith. Yet, a final act of pride marred his final years. Incited by a census of his fighting men, David trusted in human strength over divine providence. Immediately, his conscience tormented him. Faced with a choice of punishments from God, he chose to fall into the Lord's mercy. A devastating pestilence struck, claiming 70,000 lives. Overcome with grief, David cried out, taking the blame for the people. He was commanded to build an altar on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. Refusing to accept the land and animals for free, David insisted on paying a high price, declaring he would not offer a sacrifice that cost him nothing. The plague ceased, and God's anger was satisfied.
Subscribe.